Today on the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast, I'm talking with Dr. Ackerman. He is a Harvard Medical School trained psychiatrist who has 45 years of clinical experience. He has also innovated a model of group therapy based on mindfulness and runs therapy educational groups across the state of Rhode Island. His approach to mindfulness training involves learning how to access and develop the best parts of ourselves by understanding our human brain better. In that sense, he considers himself to be a brain educator, and his prescribing philosophy is, don't just medicate, educate. Here's a clip from today's show.
The part of our brain that's noisy and negative tends to dominate. Again, no other species has that. If you throw a dog a frisbee and it doesn't catch it, it wags its tail and says, this is fun, let's do it again. If you throw it again and it doesn't catch it, wags its tail even harder. It says, oh my, I haven't had that much fun since yesterday. Yeah, throw it again. If you throw a human being a frisbee and it doesn't catch it, the first thing they look around to see who's watching. And they've drawn a conclusion about their, sports abilities to catch. Everything just immediately about judgment, negatively about the self.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. BrainMD nutraceuticals are high-quality supplements specifically designed to support and enhance brain health. Developed by Dr. Daniel Amen and his team of experts, these supplements use carefully selected ingredients backed by scientific research to promote cognitive function, mood stability, and overall mental wellness. BrainMD's commitment to purity and efficacy assures that their supplements provide targeted nutrition for the optimal brain performance and long-term brain health. Be sure to click my link in the show notes. Thank you so much again for joining me so soon, Dr. Ackerman.
My pleasure, Wendy.
So last time you were just recently on and we talked a little bit about your book, Me, Myself, and My Amygdala. Today we're here to talk about your latest book, Me, Myself, and My Temper, which is a great follow-up book. I really enjoyed it.
The books have a link to them, which is that I've been teaching in Rhode Island for the better part of 10 years, these brain education courses, mostly to adults. But two things have happened in the groups, which is they go home and they start talking about what they learned with their kids. And then the second thing is that they have said as a constant lament, I wish I learned this stuff when I was younger. Mm-hmm. So it started the wheels turning in my head. Why not write a brain education for kids? And that was the inspiration to write this second book. This is Me, Myself, as My Temper, is learning about the brain in a way that's user-friendly for both kids, parents, and my ultimate goal is to get it to be effectively like a classroom that can either be home taught or taught in school.
Well, it definitely has a lot of, when I was reading through it, a lot of great practical information definitely for the kids as well as the adults that are working with the kids. So yeah, that could be the moms and dads, or it could be a teacher like you mentioned, or, babysitters, things like that. But it was really practical and had a lot of great influence where you could see that the kids can actually be involved. Right. And it's very simply written. So anyone can really understand it, and it dives pretty deep into what was going on in the brain.
And at some point during our discussion today, I can play you something that's not released yet, but which is coming next year, which is a section of the audiobook that's coming out on this. And what I was looking for was to find the narration done by a teacher that could help inspire learning. And I lucked out. It took me a couple tries to find the right person. But you'll see when I play it for you what it sounds like to be taught by an enthusiastic teacher this material that's in the book.
Well, and that's wonderful because I'm the type of person where I love the Audible books. And so I find it very easy, especially when you're traveling. I used to have a longer commute. Now I don't have a commute like I used to. So it was great. I loved listening to Audible books in the car while I was driving because I could hear what I needed to read and still get to where I was going. But yeah, it was a great way. It was very calming and relaxing for me while I was driving. So that was one of the things that I loved about the Audible. So I'm glad that you'll have that in an Audible version as well.
Very, very excited about that. And when I listened to the Audible, it was almost as if I was seeing a song that I wrote, now produced, or a play that I wrote now on Broadway or something. It just sort of came to life because the vision was to be a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And to be as if you could imagine yourself going into a classroom, the subject matter, instead of just being math or science or something external to you, was your brain.
Yeah. How do you hope that this book will change the way that we, or teachers, I should say, or parents, really approach the emotional education for their children or the children that they deal with?
The spirit of brain education is really thinking about how incredibly unique the human brain is. In particular, that we are the first species that ever existed that is even aware that we have a brain. Now that's a head scratcher. When you stop to think that not the bunny, not the rabbit, not the deer, nothing that has a brain has a clue that it has a brain. Never mind can conceptualize what the function of a brain is. Never mind can learn about it. Never mind can use what they learn to their own benefit. And that becomes, I actually never stopped to think about it. And then when we stop to think that the next thing, there are some other oddities about our mental functioning. We're the first species that's even aware of our mental functioning. And one of the things that we notice if we pay attention is that our heads are just filled with negative self-thinking. And oddities like tempers and excessive amounts of anxiety and some things that are kind of troubling and disturbing. But we're the first species that even has an awareness of them and can even put language to them and identify what they are. So we're in such a unique position in evolution's schema. And in the first book that I wrote about the amygdala is that small part in all mammals that generates anxiety, fear, and aggression. And in all species prior to humans, all the aggression is directed outwardly. Species use it to fend off predators, and they use it to obtain food. We're the first species who not only does that, but we direct a lot of the aggression against ourselves.
Very true.
And from an evolutionary point of view, it's another head scratcher. What is the evolutionary benefit of directing aggression about ourselves? Because every human being at some level says, how could I be so stupid? Which is the most mildest and most common form of self-directed aggression. Keeping in mind no other species does that. If the mighty lion is chasing after a wildebeest and doesn't get it, it doesn't go moping and think it's terrible.
Very, very well put, yes.
But human beings in the same predicament would think that they're failures. And so we're the most advanced species that almost oddly has the most incredible tendency to feel negatively about ourselves. So one point in making a kid-friendly version of some of these concepts is to think of the human brain as basically its best part as a superpower. And our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to appreciate what an incredible superpower we have. And also to learn how to train it and utilize it and develop it and strengthen it. Also, the superpower has the ability to observe all the other parts of the brain. And including that, it can conceptualize maybe all the parts don't work so well. When I go to use all my fingers, if I'm playing piano, some of them work a little more with dexterity than the other ones. If parts of my brain work unevenly, there could be potentially even part of my brain that functions a little bit like a tripwire. And just like I don't want to trip over my slippers in the morning, if I know where they are, I know how to avoid them. Mm-hmm. So if I can conceptualize that most of the parts of the brain just function beautifully and wonderfully of their own, we not only don't want to walk around them, we want to just appreciate how fabulous they are. Parts of the brain allow us to see, to move our arms, to speak, and to sense hot and cold and taste and just incredible things. And then, well, what about this part of the brain that jeeps us up, gets us, way too anxious or way too irritable or way too moody? Well, what if that's just a small bunch of neural circuits that we need to forgive them for they know not what they do? And that we can learn to navigate around them. Again, the only species that has the capacity to be, number one, aware of them, to conceptualize them, to even conceptualize productive parts and non-productive parts, and to learn how to circumnavigate around the parts that are not so productive, without internalizing or feeling negatively about having been hardwired with a counterproductive part.
Well, and I think that's definitely one of the biggest ones that I think parents immediately can probably resonate with, or people that, that maybe teach. They probably have a lot of students or know somebody, everybody I think knows somebody who has been labeled as ADHD or ADD. So that's one of the areas of the brain that can be very productive or very unproductive as well.
So one of the notions I have about ADHD is that if we look at the relevant psychological behavioral functioning parts of the brain, there's really two. There's a higher one derived from the prefrontal cortex and a lower one derived from the amygdala. And the amygdala, which is in everybody, has ADD in it, which means everybody has ADD. So when we're talking about the diagnosis of ADD, we're talking about someone whose ADD has an extra jalapeno pepper. And people have different degrees of ADD, so some people have extra spicy. Mm-hmm. But the notion is everyone has ADD. And the question is, why? From an evolutionary point of view, they put in two completely different gears into the brain for survival. One is to be able to kind of look all over the environment without getting caught on any single one space. Because if you over-focus, a predator can come at you from either side. So something was designed to keep you scanning the environment and not being able to focus. At the same time, you had to see out into the grasslands to put your eyes on, is that grass moving or is that a lion's ear that's popped up? And you also have to be able to, like with the camera, zoom in and hyper-focus. If we can conceptualize that the different parts of the brain were added at different times, and that we have a zoom lens that allows us to hyper-focus, as well as a part that keeps us scanning, then everyone has both of those features. And the notion was that the best features are in the prefrontal cortex, which tripled in size over our nearest mammalian relatives, and the ability to transcend the ADD portion really depends on the development of the prefrontal cortex. So this is important for kids to know, which is that their prefrontal cortex is not even close to being developed until their mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
Second, that it develops throughout your life, so it's always like a muscle that you are able to strengthen. And that's the part that helps you transcend the ADD and also transcend the management of anxiety and anger and irritability, moodiness and depression.
Enter the superpowers, right?
Yes. So again, we have one part of our brain that, dishes it out, and the other part that can get up to bat and hit it.
That's a great analogy, too, especially when the kids are involved.
But the notion is that that this is not something that we asked for. It's not a Christmas present. We didn't ask for particularly the troubling part of our hardwired brain. It is our primary diagnosis, which is that we're human. This is part of our basic core humanity, the way that we are wired. And it's very helpful to understand the wiring diagram.
Well, and your book has a lot of great photos in it, too, that I think not just the parents and teachers will really appreciate, but I definitely think the kids will as well, to really help them understand or even be at least a little intrigued or interested in what's really going on with them or why they may think or feel certain ways at certain times.
Well, again, one of the most interesting things is that, again, human nature is that we have a vulnerability to feeling small and inferior. Mm-hmm. And in reality, we have the best brain on the evolutionary market. And the challenge question is, how come the whole species isn't walking around as if they just got a brand new bicycle or a brand new car that they love? So there's two things that are kind of really compelling. One is, and especially around the holiday season, that I think is kind of useful as people kind of get gift preoccupied, is to be thinking of the human brain as the biggest gift that has ever been given to any species. And it wasn't something that we had to wish for and hope for. We actually got. And it's like no other brain that's ever existed. And the other is that accompanied with that is the gift of life. That these are two gifts that have been bestowed on every human being on the planet. And we stop to appreciate just how remarkable that is and how remarkable our brain is. Because there's a lot of living things that don't have the living brain, the human brain. We got both. We got life and the human brain. And at that point, we should say, stick a fork in me. I mean, there's so much right there that I then want to say, all right, so what's gumming up the works? Why on earth would I have a tendency to feel small if I've got these two things? Life and the human brain. If I look at the human brain as the most ingenious toolbox ever created.
Yes, it is.
And
really.
Especially the prefrontal cortex that loves to solve problems and fix things. I'd say, wow. Holy moly, I can see life has many challenges to it, but it's so fabulous to have a factory-equipped toolbox. What's in the toolbox, especially in the upstairs registers, the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to even learn about the brain, and the ability to use my brain to affect my own capacity for survival. So I have this kind of notion to bring this point home from an evolutionary point of view about how lucky we are, which is that if a green toad was in a green forest, but then the forest burned down, the green toad would know that there's a big problem but not know exactly what the problem is and be clueless of what to do about it. If a human being was in a comparable circumstance, they would say, holy moly, this is a problem. I lost my camouflage. I got to go to Dick's Sporting Goods to get myself a brown hoodie. Problem solved. On to the next problem. And that notion that evolution equipped our brain with a problem solver that allows us to be aware of our own deficits and course correct for them without a mutation underscores, highlights just how unique the human brain is as an evolutionary breakthrough. Because the way evolution had it set up was that the only way the frog species could survive if the forest burned down was to have a mutation and wait 10,000 years for brown-skinned frogs to thrive. And this, our prefrontal cortex, allows us to course correct in our own lifetime. We see that we've got a problem. We can do something about it. So a book I read over the summer that was appreciating the magnificent intelligence of fish said at the end that it was just unfortunate that a fish's brain could not conceptualize the concept of net or lure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if we look at that, the fish existed before there were fisher people trying to catch them. And they were equipped to deal with the true enemies of their lives, the true threats of their life. They had nothing and no brain that could even learn how to conceptualize a net or lure. Now, in our circumstance, if we look at what turns out to be one of our biggest threats, which is our own amygdala, that puts us back in the driver's seat because we can conceptualize what the fish couldn't. The notion is that everybody has an enemy within them. Mm-hmm. And our enemy as human beings, and it's particularly true in kids, is negative self-thinking. Again, we go back to the commonplace, how could I be so stupid? Well, what does every human being do? Even if they're super kids, immediately they think about the kid who is quicker, better, smarter, better looking, the whole list of things of comparisons. And never stop to think of what am I doing comparing myself to another human being? And is it constructive to do that? Why do we do that?
Well, maybe the better question is, what do you think some common triggers are for some of those temper outbursts or the feelings like that kids maybe would have that parents or teachers would need to kind of watch out for?
Part of the notion is that if we look at the circuitry in the brain, especially when we go to temper and anxiety and fear, is that the amygdala area, or when I'm talking about it for the new book of the temper, it is trigger happy. And it's less important, the triggers is the facticity that this is it just wants to happen. One of the things is that the brain is factory equipped with more anxiety and more aggression than we need. And it's looking for it, looking for releases. On the lookout. It is actually trigger happy, which is different from figuring out what the triggers are. Because if it's trigger happy enough, it'll find the triggers. It's like the drinker who's removed all the alcohol, but they've hidden nips somewhere. Mm-hmm. It'll find the trigger. And that's the part that's a real different shift, that we're not trying to remove all the triggers as much as we're trying to realize we're walking around with a trigger happy part to our brain. And that trigger happiness is not our friend. And the more awareness we have of the trigger happiness, the more we can then learn how to circumvent it by appreciating when it's being activated, because even the wind blowing the wrong way can activate it.
Yeah, and especially nowadays when kids especially, they're combated at so many different angles. Nowadays with social media, which we never had to deal with when we were growing up, and video games, which, the games that we had back in the day were much different than they are now. And so I think, to your point, there's a lot more stressors just for kids nowadays than there definitely were in the past.
There are common themes in the stressors, which is that, how do I end up feeling about myself? Whether we're talking about social media or we're playing out on the playground, how do the other playmates relate to me? They seem to like me or dislike me. If I'm playing kickball, do I play it well? Do people laugh at me? Do I seem to show some skill? I'm constantly in this environment where I'm evaluating myself. And in this environment, what we're trying to help kids be aware of, unless you can nip it in the bud, you're always going to find yourself coming up short.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the irony of the human development, which is that we're born small, and we're the first species that really has an awareness of our smallness. And also then attributes a significance to it. It's not, well, I'm small today, but I'm going to be, Superman tomorrow. It is that I'm small and Johnny down the street is much taller. I'm constantly making comparisons that leave me feeling like I'm coming up short. No matter how accomplished I am, somebody's better.
Are there any kind of tools or exercises that you would recommend that teachers or caregivers or parents could even use to help the kids when they're going through some of those?
Yeah, number one of the guiding principles in the new book is do not compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to other species. That is that, if you say, geez, I can't read. I mean, I remember this when I was coaching soccer. And kids would say, I'm terrible. My left foot, I can't use the word, is no good. And I would say, run over to me if you would, so we can have a conversation. They would run right over. And I'd say, how did you get here? Coach, I ran. Did you run just on your right foot, or did you run on both feet? Well, I ran on both feet. Was there anything wrong with your left foot? No. So because it's not ball juggling 30 times a round ball on an odd shaped foot, you think there's something wrong with your left foot? I mean, that is that we want to catch ourselves in the act of thinking negatively about anything about ourselves. We want to appreciate the challenge that we have. What an amazing left foot we have. And not find that because I can only juggle it 2 times and that person over there can do it 10 times, I'm terrible at this, amongst all the other things that I'm terrible about this. We keep building these lists of things and we're missing the forest for the trees, which is we are walking around with the best brain on the evolutionary market compared to any other species. We want to put our feet up on the table and say, thank you.
Yeah, and I definitely tell my clients too that our brain can literally hear what we say. And so it listens to us first before it's going to listen to somebody else. So it values what we say. So if your brain hears you literally talk negatively about yourself, it's going to think that it's more important than if somebody else says the same negative thing about you.
That's also true, but one of the concepts I introduce in all this work is that we don't have one narrator in our head. We have two. Mm-hmm. And one is the one that I referred to in the temper book called the Friend Squad, that is there to cheer you up and support you under the good times and the bad times. And the other narrator is the one that's the bully squad. Laugh at you, mock at you, kind of point out your foibles. And we have these dueling narrators, and these dueling narrators are a derivative of these two parts to our brain. And this is a must-win tug of war for the positive narrator. Very important that we become aware of our negative narrator, become aware that every human being has one, become aware that we're the first species to have a negative narrator, that negative narrator is of no benefit to us. Well, and that we got to learn how to become aware of it and transcend it.
Well, and how do you tell that to a kid? You know, it's hard when they're 8 or 12 years old versus an adult.
Well, kids get the understanding of superpowers, mm-hmm. And this notion says, all right, I want you to imagine now the superpower is not out there in some kind of heroic type figure, but is right inside you, and it's right inside, right behind your forehead. I want you to conceptualize you have a superpower, and it's not out there, it's in you. And also, one of the things that superpowers is they have to overcome obstacles, incredible challenges. Your superpower also has a challenge, and that's also right inside you. So you have a superpower and a super challenge. You up to the challenge? Yes, right? Mm-hmm. I never quite realized I had the superpower. And the reason that they don't realize it is that the super challenge is tending to dominate. It's like the loud kids in the classroom. Noisy. The part of our brain that's noisy and negative tends to dominate. Again, no other species has that. If you throw a dog a frisbee and it doesn't catch it, it wags its tail and says, "This is fun, let's do it again." If you throw it again and it doesn't catch it, wags its tail even harder. It says, "Oh my, I haven't had that much fun since yesterday." Throw it again. If you throw a human being a frisbee and it doesn't catch it, the first thing they'll look around to see who's watching. Uh-huh. And they've drawn a conclusion about their, sports abilities to catch. Everything just immediately about judgment, negatively about the self. And we walk around with this noise box in our head, and everybody has one. So that, and it doesn't have to be that way any more than the TV has to be on too loud. That is, that when the TV gets too noisy, you'll hear a parent say, "Turn it down." Or a sibling say to another sibling, "Can you turn the music down?" All right? It's just too noisy. We have that sense of it's too this, but we haven't yet developed that sense about our own mental states of being, "Oh my God, that's over the top. That's an awful way to feel about myself." And not that you should feel guilty about feeling that way about yourself, because that's another complicated negative self-feeling. It's just like it's a void that more negative things want to rush in. And we want to be aware that we're the first species that not only has that flood of negative self-thinking and self-feeling, but we're the first species that can stop it, turn the volume down on it, look to another area of our brain where different kinds and qualities of thoughts are generated. If you're listening, you're riding into work and you don't like the music that's on the radio, boom, off it goes. Different channel. Mm-hmm. And you notice how differently you feel with different music. And if you can think of training a part of your brain as if it's a selector to choose what you're going to listen to. But first you have to hear what's on. And then you have to discern and make a distinction about whether that's of benefit to you or not. And again, this is we've never really thought about ourselves as being empowered to use a part of our brain to manage another part of our brain.
Well, I definitely and obviously I'm an adult, but when I was growing up, I struggled myself with a lot of, looking back now, some ADD and ADHD symptoms. I should just say ADD, I wasn't hyperactive, but I would get very hyper-focused on a lot of things as well. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot known back then about the brain like there is now and the different various ways. They just, and especially I remember there was a kid in my class too who had a lot of emotional outbursts as well. So he had a different set of kind of interesting brain health issues as well. So what kind of things do you recommend for parents, especially when kids are dealing with those emotional outbursts, to kind of help them recognize them? And
so part of it is to think about first the diagnosis called human, because I think that sets off into a different, path. When you go hiking and there are different trails to take, they take you to different places. The diagnostic trail that starts with, let's go down the human path first. Before we go down the ADD path or the explosive temper path, let's go down the human path. And I would argue if you start your journey down the diagnosis called human, the first thing you come across is, what an amazing thing it is to be human. And again, I go back to and alive, and awareness of being alive, and having this amazing human brain. That's my first stop on the path called diagnosis human. I go to the second path. All right, what else do I have? And I can go, I have 2 arms, 2 eyes, and a whole number of other things I have. But let's say I even get to the point where I say, and I also have an explosive temper and I have ADD. And part of that, by the time you get there, it's no biggie. In part, because ADD is just a variant of being human. It's not something that it stands out to you and maybe to your parents like a sore thumb. It adds to the reasons that you could designate yourself as not like others. You don't need ADD to do that. You would do that if you were just human. Every human being feels like they stand out like a sore thumb for one reason or another. They're too tall, they're too short. They're too wide, they're too skinny. That's human. And it's silly, but part of being human is being silly in the way we think about ourselves. So once you then are there, you can look at your, degree to which you have ADD in context, because then it's not like this kind of sore thumb. You're not Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You're not standing out from the crowd. You're saying, I'm a reindeer. I'm on Santa's team. I see my purpose, my functionality of how incredible and unique that I am. And if I got, a little glitch here, it's no biggie. I can learn things about how to manage that glitch, and that I don't want to over-focus, ironically, on having ADD.
Mm-hmm.
I want to refocus on having an extraordinary brain.
Well, I love that because it's one of the things that I really tried to hit home with clients or family, friends, whatever, because I think that people, and I was 100% guilty of this, when they're given a diagnosis, that's where they think it stops, is they then become that diagnosis, or they identify as, ADD, I have depression, so therefore I'm depressed. And it seems to kind of keep people in that situation instead of looking at it like you and your books now indicates, where you have a superpower.
Right.
Okay, what can I do with that?
Yes. And so this is the core concept behind the titles of these books. Me, myself, and my amygdala. Me, myself, and my ADD. Me, myself, and my temper.
Right.
And I was teasing someone who really loves his material but caught a cold, and I said, maybe the next one will be me, myself, and my temperature. But the difference is that when you feel sick, it feels alien to you.
Mm-hmm.
When you have these other things, you identify with them as if they're markers of you and define you. And that's not where we want to go. We want to learn to disidentify with this. So I say, for example, I have a gallbladder. I don't think of myself as gallbladder. I think of the gallbladder as something that's in me. Mm-hmm. I can think about bile. I understand that bile is inside the gallbladder. I don't think of myself as bile. And if I think of the things that are in my brain or in my mentation and mentally as things that are in me but do not represent me, I can have a relationship with them, especially if I see how unique it is to have one part of the brain that's able to observe them, that's able to learn about them, and to learn how to, if you will, befriend them or not be defined by them. If I have a bully in me, doesn't mean I'm a bully.
Well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the brain can contribute, or maybe you could explain how the brain, you can get the kids to befriend their temper and emotional outbursts. So is there something that's in your book maybe that helps them to understand that?
One of the core concepts, and I'll play an excerpt from the audiobook so you can get a feel for how this is going to get across to kids, is to think about the negative spectrum, which are the kinds of feelings: anger, feeling inferior, feeling like a failure, feeling guilty, feeling embarrassed, feeling ashamed, feeling angry, feeling resentful, feeling bitter. There's a whole spectrum. And those are juxtaposed by all these wonderful feelings, feeling love, kindness, compassion, joyousness, friendliness. I mean, there's so many fabulous feelings. You say, wow, what a mixture. This is really quite a rainbow. But if you looked at the whole range of feelings, particularly the negative spectrum ones, as like seasonings, and you were asking yourself, is there a pinch of any of this negative stuff that I could use? The answer is probably yes, a pinch. But if I opened up the whole jar and just kind of poured it into the recipe, it's going to ruin the taste. Mm-hmm. It's going to dominate the whole thing. So one way to get at the concept of befriending them is thinking about, and I put this in the book, that Mother Nature was like a nervous Nelly mother and said, look guys, I don't know how much fear, anxiety, aggression, anger you're going to need to navigate your lives. But I want you to have more than enough rather than not enough. So I'm going to pack your brain like I was packing your lunchbox. You're going to find 3 sandwiches, 3 pieces of fruit, 4 snacks, and to the point where you're going, what is all this stuff for? And it's just carrying weight around. I can't possibly even eat that much. And you might say, and why did you pack it that way? I didn't know. I didn't want you to be hungry. I didn't want you to go without. All right, that's too much, Mother Nature. And Mother Nature, again, justifies it by saying, I didn't know how much you need. So what I did was I put a sizer in your brain. Another part of your brain could say, ask the question. No other species can do this. How much aggression do you need for this task? How much anxiety and fear do you need for this task? And I want you to measure it out and just use what you need. I'm going to equip you and no other species with the ability to do that sizing up. Now, you have to train to do that. That doesn't just happen automatically, but you have the capacity to do that. That's a way of befriending these and thinking of them as maybe in just pinch amounts, they can be beneficial. But I also can learn and appreciate that in an excessive amount, this is why we get haircuts, shave, I mean, things just, fingernails, I mean, they just go too much. And then we can get hurt by them. We get scratched by our fingernails.
So you have a clip that you're going to share with us?
Yes. Yep.
Great.
Lesson 1. Human brain appreciation.
You hear it okay?
I can.
Human beings have been made by creation and evolution. Our brains are built with certain capacities that no other brain has. It is the only brain that is capable of being aware that it is a brain and of understanding the purpose of having a brain. We have the only brain capable of studying and learning about the brain, of learning what the various parts of our brain do. As a brain educator, I teach folks to learn how remarkable this master organ is that we carry on our necks, which runs so much of our lives. I believe the more we know about how this remarkable organ works, the better we can understand our human nature. Many of the adults I have taught about the brain have told me, "Gee, I wish I learned about the brain when I was younger." Now it is time to bring our kids, you, into the brain learning process. No one is more curious than our kids. When we learn about our brain, we learn that we as humans are really blessed with a superpower, our prefrontal cortex. This part has tripled in size from our nearest mammalian relatives, and we can learn to strengthen it like a muscle through our lifetime. The brain operates the nervous system throughout our bodies. It can be thought of as like a shopping mall layout. Stores are conveniently located together in one centralized area. Many stores we like, some we don't. One of the biggest stores in the brain mall is the prefrontal cortex. This part of our brain allows human beings, and only humans, to be aware we have a brain. Further,
Yeah, that's definitely
we're able
great.
to understand our brain's purpose and learn how to operate it more constructively. We also learn that we have a very small, but very intense fight or flight area of our brain that automatically erupts, at times like a volcano, with excessive anger and excessive anxiety. By training our superpower, we can learn how to take from our huge anger, aggression, anxiety, or fear reservoirs just the amount of anger or anxiety we need and leave the excess behind.
Yeah, you picked a great
Today,
narrator for sure.
I learned that our human brain has more superpowers than any other brain. I also learned that some of what comes from my brain is excessive at times, and this helps me understand better why I can get so angry and so anxious. I also learned that an animal, like a fox, also has a brain. But human beings are the only ones who are aware of their own brain.
So this was built upon not chapters, but lessons. Mm-hmm. This is lesson 1. And, the flavor was, here's the lesson, they come home, they're asked, what did you learn in school? They say proudly, this is what I learned about my brain today. And there's 11 of them that goes through this. And I think I could see the smile on your face as you were listening to it. Mm-hmm. You could almost feel, the resonance this really will have with kids.
Yeah, and it's, like I said, it was definitely laid out really well. I wish there was more things like that when I was growing up, because it really would have helped me. I was definitely all about the encyclopedias and learning in the science books, and I think that would have been really fascinating to me, right, when I was younger, to learn about it for sure.
So what I tell the adults when they get into that lament, I say, whatever age you are, just be glad you learned about it now and not 20 years from now, because you would be saying, I wish I learned it when I was younger, and you did.
Yes, exactly right.
Right. But it is what, again, it underscores what a unique position that we're in as a species to be able to learn about our master organ. And the thrust of this is human brain appreciation. It is really a remarkable organ. Because it has a pothole in it doesn't make it any less magnificent. And even the pothole was more useful to us in an earlier time in our history. So we can have some historical appreciation that it had some greater value back in the day, and has some residual value even today. But the bigger picture is what a magnificent organ it is. I had the good fortune to be at an Andrea Bocelli concert. Oh. And there was a conductor on the stage, 120 musicians. And one of the images of the prefrontal cortex is the conductor. Just the part that knows all the different parts, knows all the different instruments, including the singers, but all the instruments supporting the music, and is able to orchestrate them. And the notion that the prefrontal cortex is the place where everything has the potentially to get integrated into a whole to produce something just beyond what any individual one part could do. And that's what our brain is basically functions like. But we have to kind of learn how to see it as well. Never kind of realize. And again, that's taking my mind off the ADD part of my brain, because why do I want to dwell on that when I have a conductor?
Yeah, that was a great analogy. I loved it.
Right.
So when does your book actually come out, or did it already come out? Because I know
the ebook is out, the paper book is out, and this audio book should be out at the beginning of the year.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because I knew that you had given me the book to read, so I wasn't sure when I had a feeling it was a sneak preview.
Now. And I'm working on, as we speak, book 3, which is a book about self-harm, which is more for the teenage years where people are actually, cutting themselves or burning themselves. But the concept that draws them all together is self-directed aggression. That's a kind of a unique thing. It's been staring us in the face, which we haven't quite really seen it, which is how much aggression is in our species. And it's really a lot. But we're the first species that save some of the aggression to direct against ourselves, which no other species does, and which does us no benefit.
Well, and hopefully now that you've got this book, you've got kind of every age bracket and marker for all across so hopefully with some people reading this book when they're younger, or the parents and teachers, they're kind of hitting some of those young people to avoid the next stages when they're doing the self-harm or when the amygdala is in full force and they're then drinking and other things as well later in life.
But part of the key, too, of this is to see this in its core form, which is an essential part of our nature. Mm-hmm. Not the best part, but sort of built into this, which includes the parents and the teachers and the police officers and the cousins and the first cousins and the second cousins and the brothers and the sisters, because they have amygdalas too.
Well, where can people get your book?
On Amazon.
Perfect.
And there's other stores you can get it through, but that's where it's.
And when you get the Audible version, is that going to be on Amazon Audible, I'm assuming?
That will be on Amazon too.
Perfect. That's usually where I always get my, in the past when I got Audible books, that's usually where I went to.
The metaphor of an Audible is you're thinking about what are you listening to? And when we think what we're listening to with our dual narrators, that's an important question. And you'd be surprised how often you're listening to the counterproductive narrator.
That's deep thoughts for tonight.
Why not?
Well, at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guests for their don't miss this moment. What would your don't miss this moment be for our talk today, or maybe about your book that you'd want to leave the listener with?
Yeah, I think it is to... I think of it from the brain appreciation, which is the notion of this sort of double gift that we have as human beings. Not only this gift of life, and life at some level is just absolutely magnificent, whether we start with a sunset, a starry sky, a magnificent landscape, or the parts of the universe that are just beyond magnificent, and how magnificent it is to breathe, and to even be aware of being alive, and then to have, in addition to that being alive, because there's a lot of living things, this incredibly advanced brain to help us navigate our way through our lives, and especially if we can learn how to operate it more effectively. It's like a musical instrument. It plays better when it's tuned. And if we can learn how to tune it and do some practicing with it, maybe it can be a real hoot to be walking around with a brain.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to start the year off, right? Because, I think we all kind of take for granted a lot of things in our body, but definitely our brain. It's just always there, and so we don't think about it, how sometimes it needs our help to work properly and to work well.
So I put in the closing to the new book a takeoff from the OJ's song of yesteryear. I think the OJ song is, now that we found love, what are we going to do with it? This paraphrase was, now that we realize we have this amazing brain, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. I'm curious to know what kind of superpowers or what things that kids would realize. Each one's going to realize something different about themselves, I think.
Right. And that hopefully that list of the things and the abilities and its capacities, the hallmark with is intelligent reasoning, but it also can be capacity for fun, for play, for laughter, and ultimately for problem solving. It just loves to figure things out. And so ultimately every human being is trying to figure out how to be happy, how to feel well. And again, part of that is, we have the capacity to really understand what generates the unhappiness and how we can navigate around that. No other species can course correct for their own tendencies, even if those tendencies are counterproductive.
Well, can you tell my listeners where they can find you or follow you, or maybe check out your website? Or
Yes, my website is at AckermanPsychiatry.com, www.ackermanpsychiatry.com.
Perfect. And I'll put that in the show notes so people can click on it when they're not driving, or they have a chance to check you out later.
Fabulous.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your new book because I really enjoyed it.
Yep.
I think it's going to be a great value to a lot of people.
Thanks so much, Wendy.
Are you looking for a good probiotic? Seed DS1 Daily Synbiotic has both prebiotic and probiotic. It supports digestive health, heart health, skin health, and gut health, including those who suffer with IBS. Their products are clinically studied and third-party tested for quality, and I think you'll be impressed with their eco-friendly packaging. Click the link in the show notes and use my code FORGIVEN for 15% off your first month supply. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and soul, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use, or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.